Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The current administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has spent barely 8 months in power, but has implemented economic reforms to uplift the state of Nigeria's economy. To wrap up the year 2023, the Senate approved President Tinubu's request to borrow $7.8 billion and 100 million euros as part of the 2022 to 2024 borrowing plan of the federal government. The request was approved after the Senate considered and adopted the report of its Committee on Local and Foreign Debt during plenary. Tinubu had said that the Federal Executive Council, under former President Muhammadu Buhari, approved the loan facility on May 15, 2023 to finance infrastructure, health, education, agriculture, insecurity, and other sectors. He further explained that the foreign loan has become necessary to bridge the financial gap and return the economic activities of the country to normalcy. The funds, he said, will be used to develop infrastructure, agriculture, health, education, water supply, security and employment, as well as financial management reforms. Joining us on the show this morning to take a look at the economic outlook of the year 2024, what the federal government should do to improve the economy and mistakes to avoid, is Tilewa Adebajo, the Chief Executive Officer of the CFG Advisory. Tile, good morning and welcome to the morning show. And by the way, Happy New Year to you. First time we'll be seeing you in the new year.
Yes, indeed. It's a good way to start the year. Happy New Year,
Happy
Ayo.
New Year.
Happy New Year, Rufai. Happy New Year, Ruben.
Okay. I mean, we don't need to give you any long summary. You already know the subject. I just want you to help us do a review of the 2024 budget as passed, paying attention to the decision to add 1.2 trillion and to increase the budget on the grounds that, there was inadequate funding for some MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies. And then the borrowing plan that, is going to run into trillions of naira. And then the securitization of ways and means, which you had written about, argued against, and described as a violation of Section 38 of the CBN Act 2007. And then the jubilation, that capital expenditure at 9.9 trillion is something to jubilate about. And some of the other details in the budget has passed.
Thank you very much, Ruben. First of all, I think, yes, the budget has been passed, and I think it shows a positive signal as to which direction we're going. The key challenge of this budget is the fact that there's going to be a deficit of now 10 trillion with the 1 trillion they've added to it. So the question is the fact that how are you going to finance this budget when you have like 17 trillion in revenues? What was the performance of the last budget? Probably they reached about 65 to 70% of the revenue targets. So clearly, the ability to be able to implement the budget properly will depend on how much revenue that you can raise. And I think that's quite clear because your borrowing limits have been reached. And, it's now a question of how much revenue you're able to generate to be able to fund the budget. So I think in terms of getting the budget out, I think we'll see what happens in terms of how the revenue is going. Of course, the borrowing plans have been identified. You're looking at the 7.8 trillion and all that. So, but I think what is even more important is the fact that by next month, it will be a year since this administration has been elected. I think we should not forget that a year ago, we concluded the elections. So right now, this government was actually elected in February last year. So I think it's important that they begin to implement their economic policies because there's not much time left. So in terms of the budget, I think we've got that over and done with. It's now a question of implementation. So the next thing you talked about was the fact that we're having some signs. The FAC allocation in November was actually about 8 trillion, over 8 trillion. So that represents about 130% increase since May. So what you're beginning to see is the impact of the removal of the fuel subsidy. We're beginning to see that impacting the federal allocation accounts. and also the exchange rate mechanism, which we have changed into removing it into a more market-driven. So that is bringing more revenue into FAC. So between May and November, we've seen a 130% increase. If that trend continues, I think it's a step in the positive direction. Yes, now the other issue we've talked about is the Ways and Means, which they approved securitization of another 7.3 trillion. The Senate did that on Saturday. Yes, while securitization, while the Senate and both the President don't have the powers to securitize Ways and Means financing, they do have powers to be able to repeal and amend it. But I think if you put yourself in the shoes of the policymaker, the Ways and Means financing loan itself now is about 30 trillion. So the interest rates at that was 20%. That would have been 6 trillion. Now add that 6 trillion to a deficit of 10 trillion this year's budget, you will have a deficit of 16 trillion. So it's clear from definitely when you look at it from like a doctrine of necessity that you need to find a way to reduce significantly the interest on that. So that is what they have done in terms of that. But like I've said, there's also the next step, which is now implementing remedial legislation, which is to be able to amend Section 38 of the CBN Act to be able to change some of the, amend also sections of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. You need to empower the Fiscal Responsibility Commission. By doing this, you will now enable the Central Bank of Nigeria to be able to accept that restructuring that you're doing. Because as it is right now, without the remedial legislation, the Central Bank cannot accept these measures. But that's a first step measure, and the next step will now be to do the remedial legislation so that when the Central Bank is reviewing its accounts for this year, those issues of the Ways and Means will be there. And of course, it is necessary because, first of all, what has happened now is that we now know the position of the Ways and Means, which is 30 trillion. So the anomaly by which you see whereby illegal overdrafts and all kinds of funny debts are used for financing government accounts, that will have been removed. So that goes out of the way. Then there's now transparency in reporting. We now know exactly where the money is and what it's been doing. And then again, we know that with doing this, you have reduced that interest rate from 20% to 3%. So you are going from about 1.4 trillion on the 7.5 trillion to about 208 billion a year in interest payments. And once you've done that, then I think you can now begin to approach the financial markets and government can now begin to raise debt on a transparency basis. So once that remedial legislation comes into place, then we're more or less done with the Ways and Means financing, and then it can all be part of the official debt as being reported through the Debt Management Office.
All right, let me come to, since you talk about budget performance and this for this particular budget cycle, some assumptions and approvals on passing of the budget. Number one is the 1.78 million barrels per day in terms of oil production. How realistic is that? Are you optimistic about that? The second is pegging the exchange rate at 800 naira to a dollar.
150.
750, 800 naira to a US dollar. And then also the final point was also the GDP growth rate projections of 3.88%. I'd like to get your take on these assumptions and provisions by the...
Right. They pegged it at 800.
800.
750 was what was proposed by the executive.
Yes. Yeah. Then the senators, I think, did 800.
Yeah.
Well, I think, like you said, these are basically assumptions. The 1.8 million barrels a day of crude oil should not really be a problem for Nigeria. Nigeria should have the capacity to produce at close to 2.5 million barrels a day or more. We hit 2.5 million barrels a day for the first time in 1977. So if we continue to encourage the IOCs to make the right investments, you improve the security situation in the Niger Delta, we could easily hit 2 million barrels a day. So that's really where the challenge is right now. And we need to get our gas activities going because that really is the key to whatever it is we need to do. So from the 1.8 million barrels a day, that's more of an investment and a policy situation that you can now use, and of course the security situation. to be able to enhance oil revenues. So that's not really a problem. Pegging the exchange rate is neither here nor there, because if exchange rates now with the sort of system we're operating is market-driven, so if the oil revenues improve, then the exchange rates can come.
Market-driven.
Yes, it's market-driven. So if oil revenues improve and we have more supply of dollars in the system, then the exchange rate will come down. So what that means for government is that becomes savings, and you begin to have excess revenues. So if you go over, then you know that you'll have a shortfall. So the benchmark is to be able to look at that, but most of the people in business in Nigeria will probably be using a different benchmark. They'll probably be looking to a benchmark in the parallel markets, and some companies have even looked at their benchmark as high as 1,500 to the dollar. So it depends on your perspective. So a lot of people do that to be able to hedge against any foreign exchange risk in the movement. So I think that's really where it is. So at the end of the day, it's the performance of the budget that really counts.
The GDP growth rate.
GDP growth rates at 3.88 is not sufficient for Nigeria as we are today. As you know, there are about 133 million Nigerians in multidimensional poverty, and we have shrunk a middle class. Our middle class has shrunk. Purchasing power among our consumers has also shrunk, and we talked about the sachet economy some time ago. So in order for Nigeria to see sustained development, you're looking at GDP growth of 8 to 10% on a sustainable basis. 3%, 3.8 is a good start. It's still positive, and it's higher than our population growth rate of 3%, which is something we must look at as a minimum benchmark, because if your population is growing at 3%, your GDP should be growing at least 5% to be able to get a sustainable growth. So while these projections are there, the key challenge in Nigeria is still stagflation. So inflation has to come down for us to see minimal impact on Nigeria. Inflation is at 30%, so that means on the short term, interest rates need to go up, at least for the first half of this year, to be able to tame inflation. Once you tame inflation, then you have real yields, so there's value, prices will come down, and then of course your investments will have value. And once your Naira investments have value, then we'll stop chasing the dollar.
Okay, so a couple of things.
Yes.
Number one, is it not being wasteful what this government has done, that in the first 6 months or 7 months, we have taken over 7 trillion in debts, and we claim we have pulled out subsidy, which we claim that the savings was supposed to help the economy. But we have taken over 7 trillion in ways and means, which is another form of debt. But we claim we have pulled out, and have we truly pulled out subsidy? Because when you said these are some of the subsidy savings, can we truly answer that question if we've pulled out subsidy?
Well, I think you can answer the question.
No, because
in terms of, let's look at the FAC allocation. Let's look at what you're saying. The debt profile between May and December is not just the 7.5 trillion ways and means. It's significantly more than that. So you need to look at that financing, because that came from the budget of last year. You inherited the budget halfway through, and then you ran that budget through the end of the year, and then you had a supplementary budget, which you now pass through to see you through the end of that period. So get the facts right. Debt financing, I think, is something that is very critical in terms of how this government is going to survive. Because if you take a look at the debt stock in Nigeria now, we're going to over $120 billion, both domestic and foreign debts. And by the time you add the 70 trillion of ways and means into it, you look at it. So if you want to take a look at the debt profile of the country, you cannot just isolate it to ways and means.
So that brings me to my question.
Yes.
If the government claims, and please just see this with me, if the government claims we have removed subsidy gone, as I said, we have removed our encumbrances like we spent to be able to defend the Naira, gone, maybe that's about a couple of billions in a year. And now we are collecting revenue. Do we still need to incur this amount of debt? That's the first question. And the second question I'd like to ask you, you have always argued vociferously about securitization of ways and means. That is a no-no. The question is, should they not put in the remedial laws in place first that you're talking about before they even securitize in the first place? Because you said the president doesn't have the right to securitize, but and the National Assembly, apart from putting the law, but they've gone ahead to announce securitization. So are they not supposed to put in those laws in the first place before then securitize? That's just it. And then this debt we are talking about, because we are taking more debt. Take, for instance, 1.2 trillion that we're adding to the budget. The deficit is going to increase. But at the same time, we hear that the government is making savings from removing subsidy. Hence the question. And we all know how crude oil prices have fluctuated internationally, but our prices have remained constant all through. Hence my question.
Okay, let us take your argument from the headline as to what subsidy is. Subsidy is 10 to $15 billion a year. That's what has cost us last year. So if you remove subsidy in May, and you're now asking for where the savings in those subsidies are, and if those savings in subsidy is enough to finance the deficit of the government, the question for now is no, it's not. So the only evidence that we have seen so far, which I told you in the beginning, was the fact that the FAC allocation between May and November has increased by 130%. So if we can sustain that rate of increase over the next 1 year or over the next 6 months, then we will begin to see the benefits of those subsidy removal. And like I said, it's not only subsidy removal that is accounting for that increase in FAC allocation, but also the foreign exchange mechanism. Because they are no longer changing the dollars at 400, they're now changing it at 800. So it's bringing in more revenues in. So that is what we need to track. But because of the way the debt profile has stacked up, if you want to do the debt analysis, you have to take a look at this new debt profile, which is why I've said that while the securitization might not be legal, but I think you have to take a look at the doctrine of necessity. Because you cannot continue to pay 6 trillion to service ways and means. So you need to do something quickly about that. Okay, I might be able to live with that argument for now, but eventually I think those remedial legislations need to come in. So whichever comes in first is really not an issue, but what is important now is that the anomalies of not transparent debt financing has been removed.
Are you even sure this 7.3 trillion is transparent? Have we seen the CBN books based on this?
You see, Rufai, this was something that was passed by the Senate. Okay, if something goes to the Senate for approval, then that is the information that the government has given to you. So you need to be able to understand that these are official figures. And if you want to question it, then the numbers coming from the central bank statements, you can look into central bank accounts online and you will see the credit to government stated close to around the 30 trillion we're talking about. So those figures are easily verifiable. You need to do your research and you need to look into the books, and these are official numbers.
Okay, in terms of outlook, let me run by you the view of another economist. That's Dr. Dele Shobowale, who writes for Vanguard. He is saying that in 2024, Nigeria is going to slide further into economic chaos. He talks about chaos, scarcity of everything, uncertainty, and failure. And one of the indicators that he cited is that, look, 750 proposed by ESCO to the dollar, 800 naira to the dollar proposed by, approved by the National Assembly. But we have forgotten that in November, the federal government of Nigeria, through the CBN, pegged the exchange rate already at 950 to the dollar. So, and that in itself shows that, there's confusion in terms of just that benchmark. And then he talks about other things that he says will not work. Now, manufacturing is likely to grind to a complete halt. And he provides a number of other reasons, uncertainties in terms of global price, in terms of headwinds in the global space, exchange rate fluctuation, fuel supply issues, as indicated by the reintroduction of subsidy, even when they sell fuel subsidy, was gone. I'm sure you know Dr. Shobowale, he writes for
Yes.
Vanguard. But in terms of outlook, do you agree with him? Or what will you say will be the concrete outlook, item by item, in your view, for 2024?
Well, I think let us not be deceived about the situation we're in Nigeria. The Nigerian economy is in stagflation, and stagflation is a very difficult situation to come out of. High inflation, high unemployment, and low growth. And to reduce that, you find yourself with 130 million Nigerians in multidimensional poverty. So the state of the economy is not something that we're happy about, without a doubt. It's not yet uhuru. But what is important for us is the fact that when you take a look at the global economy itself, there's a lot of recovery already on the global markets. So the global central banks, their only issue now is when are they going to begin to start to cut rates? So they're only afraid of cutting rates because they don't want to ensure that they have tamed inflation, because they were slow in the beginning to hike rates after COVID. So that is what caused the global inflation. So most global economies have gotten their economies under control. A lot of the predictions for the international economy is much that most people are now moving out of cash into value assets, and value is going to be returning. So the argument is that are the central banks going to start cutting rates first quarter or second quarter, which begins to show you the sign of recovery. For us in Nigeria, our challenges are more of, I saw what Dr. Shobowale wrote, but if you take a look at that extreme view of the consequences that can happen if we do not take the right decisions in terms of managing this economy, because we do not have a margin of error anymore. Our debt profile, as you know, we're using 98% of our revenues to service debt, and we're mounting up more debt. So it's important that our revenue profile changes significantly. It's also important that we begin to see the sort of structural reforms that we need to take being there. Yes, while there's a subsidy, you can calculate the prices. Even if there's a subsidy now, maybe the subsidy is maybe 10%. It's no longer 100%.
But it's still a subsidy.
There's still a subsidy. Maybe it's 10%. Okay, but it's not 100%. And that is what is important, to now begin to see how you begin to adjust with the increases in international prices. Because once oil prices come down, these fuel prices will also go down. So right now, the prices have caught up, and so the subsidy is not 100%. Maybe it's 10 or 20%. You can calculate that. Hopefully, with this Dangote refinery coming in, let's see what dynamics. They've received their third cargo of oil with the Dangote refinery. So let's see what happens when production starts in that refinery, how it impacts that economy. But at least significant amount of subsidy has been removed. So while there's significant challenges with the Nigerian economy, what we need to see is how is this government and their policies that they're going to implement going to impact on ensuring that all these challenges or these headwinds that are possible does not happen. And it goes with managing the fiscal regime. Spending and government spending is the biggest threat to our economy in the next 12 months. And if government spending is not kept under check, then a lot of what Dr. Shobowale is talking about can happen. But if we put in the right policies and we sustain them, because the key challenge or the key threat to Nigerian economy today is inflation. So we need to increase our interest rates over the next 6 months to be able to tame inflation. If we tame inflation, then we do not have a problem. When President Obasanjo was leaving government, he had done some reforms, and under Yar'Adua, you had close to $18 billion in excess crude account. Today, we don't have that luxury. And that is why we are suffering now. So it's important not only do we restore our economy, but the buffers that we need to sustain our economy, we restore them. If you go to a country like Norway, their sovereign wealth fund is $1.3 trillion on a population of 7 million people. Saudi Arabia also has all the oil-producing countries have significant sovereign wealth funds that buffers them through a lot of the economic challenges. So not only do we need to restore our economy, but we need to put these buffers in place. So like I said, if you take a look at the international outlook, for instance, a lot of the rating agencies are looking at the outlook for Nigerian economy as positive. You know, but on the condition that we sustain the economic programs that we need to do. So it can go either way, but it also depends on implementation.
All right. I'd like to take you back to the question on manufacturing. I'm not sure you touched on that with regards to a manufacturing industry that's almost, suffering, large, almost non-existent in terms of the complaints made and enabling environments for them to thrive. How do we, because we keep talking about diversification, but in principle or in practice, we don't see this play out. What can this administration do differently to help or boost that, that sector in society? And beyond that, I'd like you to also touch on the policies. The president mentioned his policies and acknowledged the hardship it's caused on Nigerians, during his speech this morning. However, do you think we'll begin to see gains from these policies? Because it seems like the policies have been introduced, but it's the poorest of the poor who feel the impact the most. Because as you mentioned, government spending is still a big challenge because it doesn't reflect the situation of the people on ground. So I'd like you to touch on these issues: manufacturing, policy so far. When do we begin to see concrete, impact of these policies on the economy and especially on the people as well? Okay,
let me start from the third question. First of all, we need to understand that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a tough year. But if we can see these policies through for the year, then we'll begin to see the benefits by this time next year. So that's pretty clear. And I agree with you. And the only way to take the 133 million Nigerians out of multidimensional poverty is to grow the economy by 8 to 10%. That's the easiest way. Now, in the interim, you can take a look at the palliatives and what sort of things you might want to look at. Manufacturing, of course, you've talked about it. We haven't reviewed our industrial policy in years. And when we talk about the coordination and synchronization of the economy, the coordinating minister of the economy has a big job on his hands when it comes to this. Because not only are you coordinating monetary policy, you're coordinating fiscal policy, but trade and investment policy is really something that is also very important. So the Minister for Industry, Trade and Investment has significant job on our hands. We need to look at our policy. Our industrial policy has not been updated for many years. And as you can see, a lot of our industries are suffering. And our productive capacity, especially with lack of foreign exchange, you're seeing a lot of foreign companies are closing because people are importing things that should be manufactured in Nigeria. And we also have to take a look at where we have made success. Now, there was a time we used to import bagged cement into Nigeria or bulk cement. Now we manufacture cement here and we export it. We've made success in that area. So the next stage for that industrial policy is now, how do you reduce the price of cement in Nigeria? Because, if we take a look at our successes, we do not build on those successes and we do not sustain them. So there's a need to review that industrial policy and make it relevant today so that we don't lose jobs. The reason why these people are poor is because they don't have jobs. If these companies are manufacturing and you have an optimal manufacturing environment, then you are saying that you do not want to import finished goods into Nigeria. You can bring in raw materials, process them here, add value, and continue to make, benefit the Nigerians. But when your industrial policy is at odds with your trade policy or your fiscal policy or your monetary policy, then these are the impacts. So that's why government spending will throw a lot of all these things off. So it's that realignment, I think, that is really critical.
Earlier on, you said I should go do my research, but I have a reason why I challenged those numbers.
No.
You remember the last administration, and we had those conversations here, where because the CBN account had not been audited, we didn't know the true number, even when Buhari said we are securitizing XYZ amounts of ways and means. And it is with that I'm also going to challenge, probably until when we see a proper audit. And we all know what happened when the final audit came out of the CBN account. So it's the financial nebulous nature of our books that scares me. Hence, I challenge that number. Secondly, this idea of you're touting raising interest rate, does it really, I know it's a textbook thing. You raise interest rates to be able to stem the tide of inflation. But is it really that is that really the solution for the case of Nigeria? What is even causing our inflation in the first place? Isn't it best we even know that, or we ascribe it to something?
We know what is causing inflation.
What is causing our inflation?
Well, you should also know what is causing inflation in Nigeria. What is causing inflation in Nigeria? Two things. Food prices. You know that.
Exacerbated by legacy issues.
Yes, no. Food inflation is one of the key problems. And the next problem of inflation in Nigeria is government spending, the ways and means going into the system. So those are the two drivers. And the third driver of inflation in Nigeria is the removal of the subsidy, which has increased prices. So Nigerian inflation is mostly a cost push-driven inflation. And in order for us to stem that, and with all due respect, it's not a textbook thing. It's a proven methodology. Because what is happening now is the fact that if inflation is higher than interest rates, then your real yields are negative. So your savings are eroded.
Yes.
So in order for your savings to become more active, you need to be able to increase interest rates. Because if your interest rates are not high, then you cannot save, or you will not save. You will want to chase the dollar. So, but if you get value on your Naira investments through a higher interest rates, then your propensity to save increases.
But it's not worked.
We've
been increasing interest rates.
No, excuse me, it works. You are not, interest rate increase is something that the central bank is beginning to signal. If you take a look at the open market operations, the central bank is no longer operating the way it used to operate. It's operating now through direct intervention. So take a look at the open market operations, which is the standard tool. You know, because there's no point in you having a monetary policy committee meeting and saying you're going to increase interest rates, do that, and then the next day you go and throw another 1 trillion of ways and means into the system, which defeats that purpose. But if you take a look at the open market operations now, you're seeing that the rates are creeping up gradually. And once real rates become positive in an economy, even you can save, even you can feel it. So and these are the things that we need to restore. And you know, we've seen all the charts of how the interest rates and inflation has been in Nigeria over the years, and we've known the sections where real rates were positive. At the point in time, inflation was, up to 3-4 years ago, inflation was at 11%.
Yeah.
Do you understand that? So it can go back there very easily.
Tilewa Adebajo, as we begin to wrap up, let me ask you, what's your New Year resolution for the Nigerian economy? Or let me say your own private economy, which may be to make more money, and then on a larger scale, the Nigerian economy, briefly.
Well, it's always to restore value. We all want value. I was with one of my aunties over the holiday, and she's complaining. She's a pensioner. She said the money they're paying her doesn't get anywhere anymore. You see, so when you take a look at all these people, you need to restore value, because that is what the bulk of the economy depends on, value. So if my auntie, who is a pensioner, you know, has been able to manage her pension and no longer able to do that, then that's a challenge for everybody. So inflation destroys the economy. So my own resolution is the fact that restore value into the system, reduce inflation, so that the pension funds also have assets that are having value. Because if we do that, then it benefits everybody. So that's number one. In terms of my own private management, I advise my clients differently. But I mean, I have the expertise to be able to hedge myself out of any situation. You know, but that might not be the case for a lot of people. So that's why it's important that government should tame inflation. So if there's anything the government can do for us in Nigeria this year, let them reduce inflation to 11%.
Okay, on that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Tilewa Adebajo, Chairman, CFG Advisory.